This case is fascinating in a sense that it's almost unbelievable. And when I say unbelievable, it really does depend on if you believe in the supernatural or not. Now, there will be skeptics, and that's okay. So, in the comments below, feel free to explain what you think might have happened. Now, let's get into the story. Teresita Basa was born in 1929 in the Philippines, but she moved to Chicago in the 1960s to pursue her master's in music. While studying for this degree, she realized that her passion was helping people, and so she pivoted and became a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital. While studying for her new degree, she started offering piano lessons on the weekends, so every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, she had people coming in and out of her apartment constantly. On February 23, 1977, Teresita got off work at 5:30. On the way home, she decided that she wanted to visit her friend Ruth, and during this quick little visit, she mentioned to Ruth that she had a piano lesson that night, and she didn't go into any details on who it was, and Ruth didn't ask. Roughly 3 hours after that visit, at 8:40 p.m., people on Teresita's floor, her neighbors, started to smell smoke. And they had to figure out where it was coming from very quickly because they were on the 15th floor. So one of the neighbors called the building manager, and the building manager called the fire department. When the fire department arrived, they walked through the entire floor, and finally they found the source of the smoke, which was coming from Teresita's apartment. When they got there, they knocked on the door. They didn't get anything. They opened the door, and what they thought they were going to walk into was a simple routine fire, possibly a small kitchen fire, but what they found was much more disturbing. When they walked into Teresita's apartment, they went down the hall, and they found Teresita naked, with a knife sticking in her chest, under a mattress that was up in flames. The police were called, and when the police arrived, they immediately knew they were dealing with a homicide. What they didn't know, though, was how strange of a case this was going to be. Early in the investigation, not very many leads turned up. That wasn't until they found a small note when they were going through Teresita's apartment that said, "Get theater tickets to the initials AS." But even with this note, they still had no idea what AS stood for. And months went by, and still there was no motive. There were no suspects, no motive, no leads. The case was quickly starting to dry up and run cold. That wasn't until the detective working the case, he arrived at work and he looked on his desk, and on that desk he saw a note from someone that said he needed to contact another police department. And so he did. He contacted that police department, and then that police department said you need to contact a coworker and friend of Teresita's. When the detective and his partner called the friend and coworker of Teresita, they reached a man by the name of Jose Chua Jr., who was actually a doctor at Edgewater, so he worked pretty closely with Teresita. The reason why he wanted them to call was because he explained that his wife Remy was having disturbing dreams about Teresita for several weeks now. Just after Teresita's death, Remy woke up distressed, having dreamed about Teresita and who actually murdered Teresita. At first, her dreams were being passed off as just her grieving her best friend, but things changed when Remy was taking a nap one day. One afternoon when Remy was taking a nap, she started speaking to Dr. Chua in a voice that wasn't hers, in a trance-like state. This voice got Remy straight up, like she was standing straight up, looking at Dr. Chua, and said, "I am Teresita Basa." This began to really scare Dr. Chua, and he hoped that this was just some sort of grief that was taking over his wife Remy from losing her best friend. But the voice continued and said, "Doctor, you have nothing to be afraid of. You can trust me, but my killer is still out there at large, and I trust you to help solve my murder." After this encounter, Dr. Chua was still a little freaked out at what just happened, especially at the fact that his wife Remy had no idea of it happening. She had no memory of her getting up, talking to her husband in Teresita's voice. Being a doctor and a man of science, he was a little hesitant to contact the police about a paranormal occurrence, especially since he didn't have any concrete evidence. How would it sound to authorities if he were to tell them that the ghost of Teresita Basa took over his wife's body and told him who murdered her from beyond the grave? So at this point, Dr. Chua still hadn't gone to the police. Then Remy was taking a nap again one day, and Teresita possessed her body again. She got up, looked at Dr. Chua, and said, "Why haven't you gone to the police yet?" And he explained, "I don't have any evidence. My claims are just going to be dismissed and possibly laughed at." She understood and said, "Okay, I'm going to give you the contact names of 4 people. I'm going to give you the contact numbers of these 4 people, and I want you to ask them about the jewelry that is missing." Dr. Chua decided that this was enough evidence to possibly go to the police, and so he did. And when he got to talking to the police, he told them everything. He told them about his wife Remy, and he even told them about the jewelry that Teresita was missing, which was a pearl ring and a jade pendant. Eventually, he got around to telling them who her murderer was, which was Alan Showery, the initials AS. Even with all of this information, detectives were hesitant to follow up on this lead, but it was something, and they needed something to reignite the investigation because it was so close to running cold. At the very beginning of the investigation, police had already spoken to Alan Showery, but with his name coming up again, they realized that they should probably visit this man again. And so they went to his residence, and he answered their questions freely. But they started to become suspicious of Alan Showery because he changed small details in his story 3 times. First story he told detectives was that he was having money troubles, and Teresita offered to help him by giving him odd jobs. And one of the first jobs that he was offered was to fix her TV. The second story that he gave detectives was that right before he was about to walk out the door to fix her TV, she called him and said she didn't need it to be fixed anymore. And then the third and final story he gave them was he was already at Teresita's and he didn't have the tools, and so he told her that he was going to leave and then come back and fix it. Here's where things get a little strange. At the time, Alan Showery was staying with his girlfriend, and so the detectives asked Alan Showery's girlfriend about the jewelry that she was wearing, and sure enough, they were the jade pendant and the pearl ring, and she claimed that Alan had given them to her as a late Christmas present. After this crazy miracle, the police arrested Alan Showery, and he almost immediately confessed to murdering Teresita Basa. But Alan Showery's lawyer caught wind of what was going on, and he stormed all the way over to the police station and said, "You need to let my client go. This is borderline illegal because I've never heard of anybody being arrested about a supernatural vision." The prosecution rebutted that statement by saying that they weren't interested in the supernatural aspect of the case, and the voice that Dr. Chua's wife was experiencing was the initial tip, but all of the evidence came independently. With that said, it didn't matter where the tip came from. Investigators had a duty to investigate a lead that was presented to them. And as strange and outlandish as this sounded, it generated significant results and eventually a confession from the murderer. It wasn't as if Alan was just some random person walking on the street. Like I said in the beginning, he was already questioned before since he worked with Teresita at the hospital. So in theory, he was already a part of the investigation, and during the second visit, he willingly went to the police station and answered all of their questions. Time went by after the arrest, and finally there was a trial. After the trial, the jury was deadlocked, meaning half of the jury believed that there wasn't enough evidence to put Alan away, and the other half believed there wasn't any evidence to put Alan away, and so that resulted in a mistrial. What's interesting is that while awaiting the second trial, Alan somehow convinced himself that he needed to take a plea deal in order to avoid a longer sentence, and so without hesitation the prosecution agreed, just so they can avoid another mistrial. And what's crazy is that people believe that the ghost of Teresita Basa visited Alan while he was in prison and convinced him to plead guilty to her murder. Alan Showery only served 6 years in prison for the murder of Teresita Basa. He was released in 1983.